Well, they made another one. Okay, let's get to talking about this. The latest film to come out of Illumination is yet another installment in their long-running Despicable Me franchise, Despicable Me 4. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this is one I really wasn't looking forward to. Now, don't get me wrong, this is certainly not the animated film of the year that I have been dreading the most, but it certainly wasn't one of my most anticipated either. I mean, I was a little curious when that first trailer dropped, but as more time passed, my excitement just faded. And there are numerous reasons why that I'll talk about in this review, but I think the biggest one is this. I'm just tired of Despicable Me. Let me make this clear. I certainly don't hate this franchise. In fact, I did love it. I'm someone who will go to bat for the first and second film. I think they're both great animated comedies and among Illumination's best films. But I felt that the series has been in a downward spiral since Minions back in 2015 and has been struggling to recapture its glory days. The stories have been getting weaker and have been losing their heart. The characters really haven't been growing all that much. And worst of all, the comedy hasn't been all that funny. And quite frankly, it's also been forgettable. Seriously, I don't remember a lot of the jokes from Minions Rise of Gru, even though that film came out 2 years ago. The only thing I do remember about it was the Gentle Minions meme, which I thought was funnier than the film itself. There have been moments in the past 3 films that I've liked, but that's all they are. Moments. And each new installment has just been slipping away from the heart of the first 2 films more and more as time goes on. Well, this series hasn't hit the low points of other animated franchises that have overstayed their welcome, like Ice Age. It sadly hasn't changed the fact that it's becoming more and more clear that the franchise has been running out of steam for a while. So when Illumination announced they were making a 4th Despicable Me film, I can't say my expectations were too high. It didn't help that the same day they announced this film, they announced it alongside Migration, which instantly intrigued me and sounded way more interesting. And as I'm sure many of you know, I really loved Migration. I still think it's Illumination's best film to date. But I was really not all that excited for another Despicable Me, especially knowing that it was the 4th animated film in this franchise. Well, actually, technically it's the 6th, but you know what I mean. And I've already said this before in my Kung Fu Panda 4 review, but I'll say it again. Most animated franchises don't get lucky making it to film 4. I felt that both Toy Story and Kung Fu Panda got lucky, but other animated series weren't so lucky. But you know me, I always want to give every film an honest chance, so I went into this film hoping that it would be a bit fun and might even be better than the 2 Minion films and Despicable Me 3. And I can say that I did think this film was better than I thought it was going to be. It does have its moments and got some laughs from me. But sadly, I still didn't think this was a good film either. Despicable Me 4 is unfortunately another lackluster installment in this franchise that really suffers due to a lot of problems it has. I can say that it's not a terrible film per se, and it certainly doesn't reach the lows of other animated franchises that carried on far longer than they should have, like Ice Age Continental Drift, but it does show that this series has really run out of steam, and it isn't the same as it once was. Not only is it one of the weaker entries in the Despicable Me series, I would also call this one of Illumination's worst films as well. It's really a mess. Okay, so when we last left our heroes, Gru defeated Balthazar Brat, got his and Lucy's jobs at the AVL back, and made his peace with his estranged twin brother Drew, but you really don't have to know any of that since this new film doesn't really do much with this information, which I'm not complaining since I couldn't stand Drew, so let's move on. Gru, played once again by Steve Carell, and his wife Lucy, played again by Kristen Wiig, are having a happy life working for the AVL, raising their 3 girls, Margot, Edith, and Agnes, played by Miranda Cosgrove, Dana Gare, and Madison Poland, and have now welcomed a new baby son named Gru Jr., whom Gru is worried doesn't like him as much. Though things get bumpy when Gru and Lucy's boss, Ramsbottom, played again by Steve Coogan, informs the two that the supervillain Maxine Lamar and his girlfriend Valentina, played by Will Ferrell and Sofia Vergara, have broken out of prison wanting revenge on Gru. The AVL quickly puts the family into undercover, moving them into a suburban home while they attempt to make a new life as the Cunninghams. Though things get even more bumpy when the next-door neighbor, a teenager named Poppy, played by Joey King, discovers Gru's identity and blackmails him to help her steal a honey badger in exchange for keeping his identity safe. So, based on what I told you, you think that's a simple enough plot, right? Oh no, there's more that I didn't tell you. A whole lot more. And that's what brings me to one of this film's biggest problems. This story is an absolute mess. I know I'm not the first person to bring this up, and I definitely will not be the last, but this film has way too many subplots than it knows what to do with. It is crammed to the max with giving characters something to do and establishing new characters and their situations. Like, I didn't even mention Lucy trying to be a hairstylist and screwing up a client's hair, or Margot worrying about fitting in at a new middle school, or Edith and Agnes going to a karate school, or Gru and Lucy going to a country club and playing tennis, or even the minions working for the AVL and some of them being given superpowers. There is a lot going on here. However, I will give this film credit. Some of these ideas aren't bad. The idea of Gru and Lucy going undercover to hide from a recently escaped supervillain has potential, especially as the villain tries to adjust to their new lives. I could see a lot of these ideas working, but here's the thing. Most of these subplots go nowhere. Lucy's job as a hairdresser and messing up at clients' hair. Yeah, there's a brief supermarket chase with a Terminator reference, and that's it. Margot fitting in at the school, she gets a glitter bomb in her face, and it's never brought up again. The Mega Minions that the trailers and marketing were hyping up, yeah, they're barely in the film. They have one montage that has some laughs, and then that's mostly it for them. Even the whole thing with the villains isn't exactly well established. The only plot thread that is followed through from beginning to end is the Honey Badger heist, and unfortunately, it's the worst plot thread of the film. Mostly because, one, it's not very funny, and two, it has a major plot hole that I'm surprised Illumination didn't catch. The whole thing with Poppy is that she wants to be a big supervillain, and in order to get Gru to help her steal this honey badger, she blackmails him by saying she'll expose his identity if he doesn't comply. But here's the thing, though. He could just tell the AVL about her and get them to shut her up. It's not that difficult of a solution. Like, they really did not think this heist plot through. Nor these subplots, for that matter. A lot of them are left hanging. Why is that? Well, there's a potential reason. A week before this film came out, the film's director, Chris Renaud, gave an interview with Deadline where he revealed that the studio was taking a Simpsons approach to the franchise. And honestly, it explains a lot. This franchise clearly wants to go down a sitcom route. You know, put the characters in more silly situations and have the jokes play out. And that only exposes another major problem with this film. Quite frankly, I don't think this idea works for films. In fact, Illumination did this exact same thing for The Secret Life of Pets 2 5 years ago, and it didn't work then. Now, I'll explain this whole sitcom bit more in detail later in the review, but I guess we should talk about the characters. And they really don't work at all that much. One is that the old characters aren't given a whole lot to do or grow. The only characters that seemed like they were having fun and did work were the minions. They still had some funny moments, and I got some chuckles out of them. Illumination definitely worked with them the best, apart from those mega minions that the marketing hyped up so much and were barely in the film. As for the main characters, I already talked about the girls and Lucy not getting much to do, but Gru surprisingly doesn't have a lot of engaging things to do either. I already mentioned that stupid heist plot, but most of the film is trying to get his new son to like him, as well as impressing his new neighbors, and it's not all that funny. I'm not entirely sure what Gru learns here. The film seems to set up the idea that Gru is trying to be more cautious, but I didn't see that idea being expanded a lot. So all we're left with is him trying to steal that stupid honey badger. And speaking of that, let's talk about the new characters. I will say, I do like the ideas that they set up for them, but the problem is they don't do a whole lot with them, much like the other characters in the film. The neighbors seem like they would be funny, especially since they're played by Stephen Colbert and Chloe Fineman, but nothing happens with them apart from a tennis match scene. And I like the ideas of the villains, with Maxine being hungry for revenge against Gru, and his backstory for why was pretty funny, and there was also potential for his plan involving cockroaches, but the film doesn't even do anything with that. Most of the film is just him and his girlfriend traveling across the country trying to find Gru. And speaking of her, why was she even in the film? She basically did nothing, and it was just a total waste of Sofia Vergara. She's hilarious. How do you waste her on something like this? There's only one character that the film really gives focus on and expands, which is Poppy, and unfortunately, she's easily the worst new character in the film. I'm gonna be blunt here. I hated this character. Like, really hated her. And it's not because her character was kind of stupid and obnoxiously written, though that didn't help. It's mainly the voice. I have nothing against Joey King, and I do think she's fine in the right role, but I found her performance in this really grating. Her character talks in this annoying lisp like this, as if her tongue was stung by a bumblebee, and ugh, I hate that kind of voice. It's just so annoying. It's like nails on a chalkboard for me.
I don't respect boomers.
Oh yeah, I should also mention that some of the humor in this is really dated. Like there's that boomer line, and at one point a minion pulls out a selfie stick, and there's even more other random humor that just made me scratch my head.
What year is it?
Okay, there were a few funny gags in here. Some of the background gags were funny. There was a book that a guard at the school Poppy and Gru were breaking into that had a funny title, but a lot of these jokes really bounced off of me. And there's also one other thing I should mention with these characters. You notice something about the three girls? Yeah, they never get old. They still look the same as they do in the first film. Why is that? Well, remember that interview I mentioned involving the Simpsons approach? Yeah, it was mainly referring to the girls not aging. Illumination basically has kept the characters the same age, feeling it would be funnier to keep them the same and put them through new goofy adventures. Okay. I really need to talk about this in depth because this quote was floating through my head throughout the entire movie, and it really has been grating on me since the first time I heard it, so I need to get this off my chest. This approach is a horrible idea. A film story and a TV sitcom story are not the same. They operate completely differently, they have their individual strengths and weaknesses, they are not the same. TV sitcoms have the excuse of not aging up their characters because they have a limited runtime. They're 30 minutes long, and plus, they're made to entertain the audience, and they don't really have continuous storylines. If you miss one episode, you can always catch the next. And it also allows new writers to play with the same characters and put them in new situations. That's not something a film series has. Unless you're doing a different take on this series, or you're going down the anthology route, if you're making a sequel, you have to expand the story. There needs to be growth that happens with the characters as we watch them continue to progress and grow as people. That's why we go to films, to watch characters grow into becoming something new in each story. Plus, even though they're longer than 30 minutes, films still have specifically constrained run times. Unless you're continuing a certain arc in the next installment, you need to make sure the film has time to wrap up certain parts. And basically, this film is refusing to grow its characters. It's just putting them through silly hijinks and expecting the audience to buy it and walk out and entertain. But the thing is, this film series did start off growing its characters. Despicable Me 2, which is my favorite film of the franchise, really expanded Gru as well as the girls. It showed them learning more about themselves. And this new film doesn't. It tries to with its many subplots, but because of the limited runtime, the film doesn't wrap them up, so it just leaves them hanging. And I highly doubt these threads are going to be revisited if they make another installment. And even at putting aside these threads being left unfinished, I think these arcs could also be a bit stronger if the girls were, older. Plus, another big problem with this is that it's denying more creative ideas to come out of this franchise. There's a lot of potential with what you can do with making the girls older. I'm not expecting anything thematically deep or certainly dark, like, say, the character development of Gwen in Across the Spider-Verse or Poe in Kung Fu Panda 2, but I am expecting growth. I want to see how these characters are expanded, and I feel like making them older and young teenagers has potential. You can't just get away with just silly hijinks alone for a film series to keep going. Plus, as far as silly animated comedy series go, both Madagascar and Hotel Transylvania understood this. They grew the characters in each new installment. But if Illumination really wants to do this approach for this series, then why don't they just make a Despicable Me show? If they really want to keep the characters the same age and just put them through silly hijinks, then they should just make a show for Nickelodeon or Netflix. They have the resources to do it, so there's genuinely no excuse for this. All I'm hoping for is that other film series do not pick up on this trick because it's a really bad idea. And it's something I do not want to see out of other film series. Boy, did that feel good to get off my chest. Now, as far as my positives go, I do have a couple. The animation is great, like always. It's zippy and fun, and there's some good slapstick here. Plus, like I said, it does have its moments. Some of the jokes are funny and got me to laugh, but that's really about it. Otherwise, I found Despicable Me 4, sadly, another lackluster entry in this series. While it does have some great animation, a few funny jokes, and a couple of good ideas, the story has way too many subplots that are left unfinished, some of the jokes aren't that funny, the refusal to grow the old characters is exceptionally frustrating, and the new characters are either underdeveloped or just plain annoying. As far as I'm concerned, this is not a great animated sequel, and unless you are a diehard Despicable Me fan, I can't really recommend this one. It's one of the worst films in the series, as well as one of the worst films Illumination has made. If Migration was a showcase of them playing to their strengths, then this is unfortunately them playing to their weaknesses. And quite honestly, I really hope that this is the last Despicable Me film, at least for a while. If you want to see a better animated sequel, just check out Inside Out 2. That is how a sequel should be done. Now, before I give my final grade, I do want to offer a few suggestions to Illumination if they do make a fifth Despicable Me entry in the future. And that is a big if, in the hopes to avoid the problems for this film. Number 1, throw out that stupid Simpsons approach idea. It's a stupid idea, and it should be used if you're only making a TV show. It doesn't work for films. Number 2, keep the story simple. Don't put in too many subplots and just keep the premise basic and easy to follow. Hell, director Pierre Coffin has even stated that too in an interview. And number 3, bring back the heart of this series. This is something that I think this franchise has lacked lately, and I think it's something that I want to see brought back alongside the funny jokes. And I'll leave it at that. As for Despicable Me 4, it gets a 5. It's not a terrible film by any means, but definitely not a good one either. I really don't hate Illumination or this series, as I do think they have their moments of greatness and can work when done right. They've proven they can work under the right circumstances, but this new film definitely doesn't really work at all. It may not be a despicable film to watch, but I sadly can't call it that enjoyable either.